Noaia I Maori, which in my father's native tongue means thank you for living and breathing. Tonight, we look at the story of Miriam in the book of Exodus. In the book of Exodus, we read about the Israelites' liberation from their oppression in Egypt. This story focuses heavily on the callings of her younger brothers, Moses and Aaron, but tonight I want to put the spotlight on their elder sister, Miriam. I have to be honest, though. Diving into Miriam's story hasn't been easy for me. In fact, this is one of the hardest sermons I've written. Biblically, while there is mention of her, there isn't much in the way of scripture to help answer or unpack the big questions that I have, like, what is the significance of her carrying the title of prophet, and when and who gave her that title? Or why is her leading the women in song and dance such a significant part of her story? Or what sets her apart from other chosen women leaders in the Bible? And what is she doing for 80 years of waiting for Moses to return to fulfill God's promise? The truth is, there's only so much we can learn from the biblical story. These questions that I have may never have answers, and that's okay, but I think that it's important that we ask these big questions nonetheless. That being said, here is what the text did answer. Miriam appears in the book of Exodus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, Chronicles, and Micah. Of those books, Exodus 15:20 and Micah 6:3 are the most commonly referenced passages as they demonstrate Miriam's prominence among her people. Miriam is one of two girl children with active narratives during their childhood. In the Hebrew scriptures, Miriam is known as the mother of the women prophets. She is the first woman in the canon identified as a prophet, and she's named in more biblical books than any other woman. Her name has two meanings. In Hebrew, it means bitter water woman, and in Egyptian, it means beloved. She's the eldest of three siblings. While Miriam appears early in the story of Exodus, she isn't actually named until later in Scripture. The text seems to confine Miriam's prophetic gift to the crossing in Exodus 15, but I want to note that there is no indication of when Miriam begins her prophethood, nor any reason to limit her giftings to her senior years. Lastly, she lived through and experienced all the hardships and struggles of the Israelite people, and yet she is still recognized and known for praising and worshiping God. That's it. That is what we learn from the text or from Jewish tradition. What I couldn't find, or what there was very little of in the way of her story, is the period of maturation from a child into a woman. When we are first reintroduced to Miriam in her womanhood, what is clear is that she has been waiting 40 years since she sent Moses down the river in the basket. At this point in the story, he's now fled Egypt, and he spends 40 more years in Midian. By the time the Israelites are freed, Miriam has waited 80 years. She waited on the Lord for 8 long decades to see the fulfillment of a promise. I don't know about you, but I could not have waited that long. This display of unwavering faith and trust is both inspiring and incredible. I remember when I was a teenager and I was playing elite soccer and I got closer to graduation. I started making trips to various universities for campus visits and tryouts. I knew that I was going to go and play in the US. That was a promise the Lord had made to me, but that didn't happen for me at 17. In fact, it took 10 years for me to see the fulfillment of that promise. And while it did come to pass, the time in waiting was some of the most difficult and trying moments of my life to date. By the time I moved to the US, while literally living and writing my faith story every day, I was so mad at God that it literally did not matter how He provided. I was still mad as hell. And honestly, I spent more time in my blessing and season of harvest acting like the Israelites did in the wilderness than I did praising and celebrating God for what He had done for me. Clearly, I needed more Miriam in my life, and full transparency, I still do. Miriam is by nature a worshiper. She worshiped the Lord with heartfelt emotion. And while Moses stood holding the waters, it is Miriam that takes the lead and leads their people through the waters. Exodus 15 calls for a time of celebration, and Miriam celebrates with the Song of the Sea, the first liturgy of liberation. And while her song is brief and simple, it centers on the Lord being highly exalted. She worships in word and melody, with music, in instruments and dance, but most importantly, she leads others in exuberant thanksgiving, a precedent established by her for later generations of Jewish women. Let's be honest. Without Miriam, there truly would be no Moses. This story in the Exodus wouldn't exist. Miriam's unwavering faith always believed that Moses was to be God's chosen deliverer. She just didn't know when the deliverance was going to come. While she always believed, I do imagine that there were moments, like when Pharaoh banished Moses, where she questioned and she cried out to God, wondering if she would live to see the day of deliverance in her lifetime. And while in the modern church, often we are scorned for asking big and little questions, I think these moments of questioning in our respective faith journeys are important to the spiritual formation we're going through. And frankly, it's human. It's normal, and asking is totally okay. I may never have the answer to my big questions, but I'm going to keep asking them. And I have a lot of questions. And while there's still so much I want to know about this story, one thing is undeniable. Miriam's presence as a recognized leader in the Old Testament demonstrates the strength women have always played in the Bible. It is for this reason that we ought to spend the time and do the work to give these women the opportunity to have their stories told, questioned, discussed, and brought to the forefront of the biblical narrative. Men are called by name in the Bible for both excellence and also mediocrity. Women, on the other hand, had to do something exceptional in order to have their stories recorded and be identified by name. Women's stories in the Bible, named or unnamed, deserve to hold the same weight and focus as the men we talk about. These women deserve to be called by their given name and title, and to be the focus of their respectful stories rather than a footnote mention or a tokenized afterthought.